Here are the supplies that you need to make this adorable little pouch. You will need a piece of low loft batting, a piece of good side fabric, lining fabric, and then there's also going to be a template that you can download. And what I did was I traced my template onto a little heavier cardstock, and this is similar to the weight of your cereal box. You'll also need some sashiko thread. I'm using this variegated thread from Olympus, and it's number 91. You need a needle that will fit the thickness of the sashiko thread, so maybe like around a size 5 embroidery needle. You'll need a piece of bias fabric. This was just cut from a regular piece of fabric on the bias, and the length of it is roughly 25 inches and the width is about 1.5 inches. You need a water-soluble marker, a 5-inch zipper, a pair of scissors, and a ruler as well. Before you get started, there's a few things that you want to prep. I usually like to take the sashiko thread that I'm using and braid it. And I'm not going to show you in this video, but if you're ever on my Instagram, I do show you on a reel on how that's done. It's really quite easy, or you can look it up. I'm sure there's somebody that's going to show you how on YouTube. But I just find that this is just an easier way to deal with tangled threads. And so once you have it all braided like this, you just go to the top here where it's folded, and then you just pull your thread out, and then your braid stays intact. And then this is just a nice way to kind of, you know, have your threads and not have it all a tangled mess. The other thing that you want to prep is you want to take your fabric and you want to trace around trace the template around the fabric like so, and then cut them all to size. So you want to do that on the lining, the good side fabric, as well as the batting. I have all my pieces traced and cut, so there's the front piece, the lining, and the batting. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the water-soluble marker and my ruler, and I'm going to trace a grid onto the good side of the fabric. I'm going to do the grid on this about 3/4 of an inch. Normally I would just draw along the edge the grid if it's you know, a dimension that is even. For example, 3/4 quite not even. If it was like 1 inch, then I would just go right on the edge. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw myself kind of the center line. This dimension here is about 5 inches roughly. What I'm going to do is measure 2.5 inches to the center. And then that way, when I go to draw out the grid, it's not going to be uneven. For example, what I mean by that is you might end up with like a full square on one edge, and then the other edge might end up with like a half square or something. That way, if you do it from the center, it's going to be quite even. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure out the dimension for the size of the grid, which is about 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to measure that out 3/4 right from the center. You might not be able to see the blue lines, but just use something that is good for you to see. I think you can kind of see that. And you don't want to use like a pencil or anything. You want it to be something that can come off, because you don't want to see that on the piece, because you're using a running stitch. So as you can see, as I finish on this side here, you end up with 3/4 of an inch. So it's quite even. And I'm just going to turn this around and finish doing it on this side. And what you're going to do is, because you're drawing a grid, you're going to do it on the other direction as well. And I would do the exact same thing. I would draw the center line and then trace from that point. So this dimension here is, this ruler's a bit small, but I think it's roughly 8 inches. Yeah, so you want to do 4 inches. You want to do your best to make sure that that's pretty even. And then the same thing. Draw your 3/4. So I'm going to finish doing this, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so there's the grid on the piece. And before I start stitching, I'm going to put the 3 layers together. I'm just going to turn this over, and I'm going to place the batting and then the lining on top. And then I'm going to start stitching. And if you want to, you can pin this down, that way it doesn't shift as you're stitching. To pin this, I like using these applique pins because they're a little bit shorter, and I just find that I stab myself less. So I'm just going to place a few along here before I start sewing. I'm going to bring my needle up from the back, and I just do like a running stitch, and I would say my stitches are about 1/4 of an inch, and then the spacing is a similar width, and then just pull it through. And it's a very simple stitch, just kind of adds a little bit of a decorative detail, as well as it holds all the 3 layers together. And this is what it looks like on the back. And I like the variegated thread as well. It kind of gives it a interesting surface. When I'm stitching, I sometimes like to use like a needle puller, so it's kind of like a silicone thimble. And I just find it gives the needle a little bit of grip. Sometimes when you're sewing through this many layers, it can get a little bit difficult to pull the needle. I finished all the stitching. If you want, you can give this a little bit of a press, and this is what it looks like on the back. The next step is to add the bias tape, and you want to sew it on the good side here. I would kind of start so that the joint is on the long side of the pouch, and if you have like pins or clips, it's a good idea to kind of just attach it using these. I'm going to stitch this on the sewing machine 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm going to show you what it looks like after I've done that. I've sewn the bias tape all around, and this is about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So this is what it looks like. At this point, if you didn't sew it right to the edge and there's just a little bit of fabric showing through, I would take the scissors and just trim it so that you have a nice clean edge. And it kind of, you can see right there's a little bit of batting coming through. This will just help with the turning over of the bias tape. You're going to pull, give this a good tug of the bias tape, and you're going to wrap it around once and then twice. So you're just basically tucking under the frayed edge. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew along here using a blind stitch. And if you find that you need a little bit more fabric here, you can just trim a little bit of this edge off. And this is what it's going to look like on the other side. When I start, I like to kind of give it a couple of stitches just to kind of secure it, even though there's a knot. What I do is I go in between the batting and the lining fabric, and then I come up and then I take a little bit of the fabric there. So when I go underneath the fabric, it just sort of hides the stitch, so all you see is just a little stitch that comes up on that spot there. And then as I go around, I pull the fabric and I tuck it underneath. And if you want to, you can go around and tuck it all underneath and then pin it or use those clips. But I don't mind just sort of tucking it under as I go. I just wanted to show you, like I mentioned earlier, this is where all the knots are, and you could see that once I do the bias, those knots all get covered. So make sure that when you do stitch it, that your knots are really close to the edge, and then they all get hidden, and so that this inside area is all nice and clean looking. I'm getting down to the last couple of stitches. And the way I end this off is I do a finishing knot like I normally do. And then I just slide the needle inside the fold there, and then I pull it through, and then I trim it. That way the tail isn't exposed and it's nice and clean. So it's all finished. Now it's ready for the zipper. I wanted to also mention, I didn't mention this in the beginning of the video, but you do need sewing thread as well. And for the bias, I use just kind of like your regular sewing thread. But to sew on the zipper, I'm going to use a little bit of heavier weight. This is the Wonderfil thread that I had for sale in my shop a while ago. And I wanted to kind of go with this thread for the zipper. I don't know, I just think it's better if it's a little bit of a heavier thread. This would be kind of similar to what you would do, what you would use for top stitching when you're quilting. So it's just a little bit heavier than the sewing thread. I'm using a 5-inch metal zipper, and what you want to do is you want to sew this to the pouch, and you want to find out where the center is. Over here we already kind of know where the center is because of the way we measured out on the pouch. So you just need to kind of figure out the middle for this, and I'm going to use my water soluble marker to kind of mark that. So it's around there. So I'm just going to mark it so I know where the center is. And then what you want to do is you want to kind of place it. You can see this, I don't know if you could see that, the center is right there. And I'm just going to kind of eyeball it to kind of place it here. So I left a little bit of a gap between the edge of the bias and the zipper. I don't really know the dimensions. Let me just measure it, because I just did it by eye. I would say definitely less than a quarter. So I would say almost like between a quarter and an eighth of an inch. I just sort of did it by eye. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my pins and I'm going to place this so on the middle there, leaving a bit of a gap, and then I'm going to pin this down. It might be a little bit hard to do because it's a lot of layers, but do your best. As long as you have just like a few pins in there, you don't have to pin the whole thing. And it just kind of helps to kind of keep it steady as you're sewing it. I'm going to put another one here. Because I'm going to start sewing on this side like this. So I'm only going to pin this one area first. I'm not going to worry about the other side of the pouch yet, because once I get this sewn in place, I think that pin was a little dull. Once I get this sewn in place, then the zipper is pretty much where I need it to be. I have the top stitching thread threaded onto my needle, and I'm going to start by just going underneath here. Just at this end here, I'm going to just go underneath and just tack down that edge of the zipper. Just a couple of whip stitches. Now I'm going to start sewing, and at this point I can probably take this needle out because I have the zipper tacked down, and also because I'm holding it. So I'm going to come up from the edge there, and then I'm going to go back down, and I'm going to just do this a few times. It's always nice to do a little few stitches for the beginning and the end. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to create kind of like a similar blind stitch. So I'm going to come up, and then I'm going to go through the bias tape with my needle, and I'm creating pretty short stitches, and then I'm going to go through the zipper and then coming up, and then going through the bias, okay, so it kind of looks like a running stitch on the back. And then I'm going to just keep going all the way around, and you can see that it's attached pretty good to the zipper. I'm going to take this pin out. So I'm going to go up through the bias tape. My needle's gone through. And then I'm going to go down to the zipper and then do a stitch and then come up to where the bias is. And then go through the bias again. And I would keep your stitches small, because if it's too wide, what's going to happen is when you pull on the zipper, there's going to be a lot of gaps. So you can see that it's secured really well. You don't really see any gaps. I got to the end of the zipper here. I'm going to flip this over, and then similar to what I did when we started the zipper, I'm going to just sort of tack it down to the end here. Okay, and then what I'm going to do now is, you can see how this part of the zipper is sticking up. What I'm going to do now is just do a whip stitch along the edge to keep the zipper from lifting up. Started stitching this area down so you could see how it's not sticking up like over here. And I'm just kind of going and attaching it just to the edge of that bias tape. So I'm just kind of putting my needle up and going through the bias tape and the zipper, and then I just pull up. And you can keep your stitches pretty close to the edge because the zipper doesn't have a raw edge, it's got a finish edge. And you just stitch that down. I marked the center of the zipper right there, and then I'm going to bring this up and just sort of eyeball that where the center of that line is. And same distance on the zipper here, and then I'm going to pin this down. If you want to, you can open this up just to make it a little easier for it to bend. And then, because I'm right-handed, I'm probably going to start on this side instead of the open part of the zipper. I'm going to place another pin there. And then you do the exact same steps as what I showed you on the other side of the zipper. The next step is now to sew the sides and then do the gusset. I tuck the tails inside, and then I start the stitching, I would say about almost 1/4 inch from the stopper there. And then what I do is I'm using a ladder stitch. So I'm going to tuck that tail in. What I start doing is I just do a couple of tacking stitches. So I do about 2 or 3 just to kind of give it a little bit of security on the ends there. And start with my ladder stitch. I would do kind of pretty small stitches. So I go on one side, come up the other side. And then just pull it as you go. And then I'm going to just create a finishing knot here, and I'm not going to worry about hiding the actual knot because you're not going to see this. This will be part of the gusset. Just make sure to pull it really tight. If you want to, you could hide the tail. Okay, I'm going to do the same type of stitching on the other side. So both sides are sewn. I'm going to open the zipper up, and then I'm going to push corners out. You're gonna do this gusset about 3/4 of an inch, and it kind of just falls along that stitch line. I don't know if you see that on where you did the running stitch. So what I would do is I would just use that as your guide and then just stitch along here a back stitch and make sure that all the fabric is pushed through well. And then if you want to, you could pin it or use clips sort of in place. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a back stitch right across. Just going to come up from the corner, just wrap around that corner there. And then if it helps you, I would draw a line here. I'm just going to go by eye. And I'm just going to do like a back stitch. I need my thumb thing again because the layers are really thick. I'm going to do a finishing knot at the end. So I just got a couple more stitches. Okay, so we're getting close to the end here, and then I'm going to kind of wrap around to do the knot around this edge here. Do another knot. And then just bury the tail. And then I'm going to do this on the other side as well. You can kind of see how it looks. So there's the gusset. Okay, so I'm going to do this on the other side and then it's finished. Here's the finished little pouch. There's the gusset. And if you want to, you can add like a little piece of leather or string, and then you can attach this to your bag. And it's great to kind of hold all your little kind of essentials. Thank you so much for watching the tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Bye for now.